Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets and here with another Travers Spotlight. And this one might be the most popular because we're talking about the filly, Thorpedo Anna, who's going to be taking on the boys in the Midsummer Derby on Saturday. And listen, she is a dynamite superstar. No two ways about it. Wherever she goes, the crowds follow. But before we start talking about Thorpedo Anna, make sure to press that like button here on YouTube and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. We have a lot of great content here, whether it's race previews, full card analyses, racing live streams, or these sort of spotlight videos on big races, in addition to great handicapping and betting tutorials. All right, well, let's talk about Thorpedo Anna. And she has become the queen this summer. She has just blossomed into this dominant 3-year-old filly who has really not had an equal in her generation among the fillies. And so she and obviously trainer Ken McPeek has made the decision to go and face the boys in the Travers. So let's talk a little bit about this horse who, like I said, has really taken over the sport to some extent. She has developed quite a following after a dominant victory in the Kentucky Oaks, and then she followed that up with another easy victory in the Acorn Coaching Club America Oaks. She's a perfect 4 for 4 this year against her fellow 3-year-old filly. So now she's going to take on the boys. And the big question is whether or not she can do it. But let's dive into some specifics about Thorpedo Anna. So as I said, trained by Ken McPeek. Now that's notable for a couple of reasons. One, Ken McPeek was the trainer of Swiss Skydiver, who was the filly who won the Preakness a few years ago. So he is comfortable running his fillies against the boys in these big spots. McPeek is someone who does not shy away from the camera. He does not shy away from the limelight. And he is someone who is, when he's confident in his horses, he lets you know it. Sometimes that bravado gets the best of him. A couple of years ago, he had a horse, Smile Happy, running in the bluegrass. And he said, it's going to take a grizzly bear to beat this horse. Well, Zandon showed up that day for Chad Brown and beat Smile Happy pretty easily, to which Chad Brown tweeted out just an emoji of a little grizzly bear. Listen, like I said, Ken's ambition and Ken's confidence in some of his horses can get the better of him sometimes. But he's got a real good one here. Jockey Brian Hernandez Jr., we saw him give that amazing ride to Mystic Dan in the Kentucky Derby, but he's given some great rides to Thorpedo Anna as well. I think he's read each of the races that he's been in with her very well in terms of knowing what was going to be necessary that day that they won the Kentucky Oaks. He knew, just get her out up front. Don't screw around and let her just get up there on the front end, and nobody was going to get her. And that's exactly what happened. Now, the sire, it's interesting. The pedigree, when we talk about the boys, a lot of times we see these big names. We see Gun Runner, and we see, Quality Road and Medaglia d'Oro, and, these kind of big time sires that will turn out these distance runners. You don't really see that with her. I mean, Fast Anna is a perfectly adequate sire, but there's not a load of pedigree here. But that's kind of what McPeek does. He's very good at spotting fillies who may not cost much at sale, but who he believes maybe come out of very productive broodmares and could end up being something good later on down the line. And that's exactly what he did with Thorpedo Anna, who I believe he only purchased for $40,000. So this is, again, a very good return on investment if you're talking about all the wins she's racked up. Like I said, a perfect 4 for 4 this year, winning the Kentucky Oaks, winning the Acorn, winning the Coaching Club America, but starting her year off actually winning the Fantasy at Oaklawn Park off the bench. She had not run in several months leading up to that Fantasy and just came out and blew away that field at Oaklawn. I do think there was some skepticism still after that race because there really was not much in that Fantasy field when you go back and look at it now. That was not a very strong field, but man, she answered all those questions and more. And she's really, like I said, not had an equal. And that becomes very obvious when you look at her past performances. This is a horse that is 6 for 7 winning. The only time the horse lost was the first time going 2 turns in the Goldenrod, and lost to a horse, Intricate, who we'll actually see run in the Alabama. And Intricate is an interesting horse because that's a horse that was very precocious as a 2-year-old, hasn't really developed as a 3-year-old, but does boast the reputation of being the only horse to beat Thorpedo Anna to this point. But what you can see, she came back bigger, stronger, faster as a 3-year-old, winning that Fantasy winning the Kentucky Oaks, winning the Acorn, winning the coaching club. And she's been earning very strong buyer speed figures, 91, 96, 99, 95, very consistent with Brian Hernandez Jr. aboard. And, what's interesting about this is a couple of things. First, if you notice, the margin of victories have not been overwhelming. So I bring that up only to say and only to compare her in some ways to Rachel Alexandra, who I think a lot of people will always make that comparison when you have a filly, a 3-year-old filly running against the boys at Saratoga. People are going to make comparisons to Rachel Alexandra. Now, if you remember, Rachel, she won by 15, 20, 25 lengths in some of her races. She just absolutely decimated her competition. I don't know if her competition is as good as what Thorpedo Anna is facing. I also don't know if the boys that Rachel faced are maybe quite as good as some of the boys that Thorpedo Anna is going to face. So it's an interesting dynamic to see how this all kind of plays out. But we've seen her be very good. She wins by 4 or 5 lengths in all of these races, wins easy. Hernandez has never really had to press on her. She's never really been in a dogfight to this point. And, it's interesting because even her one loss was kind of a blowout loss. Intricate won that race going away by 6.5 lengths. All of her other races, she's won easily. She's drawn off and won by 4+ lengths in every other start. So it's hard to say what she's going to do when another horse looks her in the eye coming down the stretch and really tries to press her, really tries to come at her. It's going to be fascinating to see because we've not gotten the answer to that yet. I do think the comp to Swiss Skydiver is probably more appropriate. A filly that was a little bit of an interesting year because of COVID and all of those dynamics. But this is another one where I feel like Thorpedo Anna might not have the dominance of someone like Rachel or maybe even Zenyatta, but you just see this incredible consistency out of her at this point. Now, the other thing to mention are the buyer speed figures, because this is something people will point to and go, well, she's not quite as fast as the boys. Yes and no. That Acorn was very, very good. Her 99 there was, I think, really legit. The Coaching Club America was an interesting race because she really had a terrible start, kind of reared up and completely missed the break in a lot of ways. And hopped at the start. It wasn't a good break. And Hernandez really had to hustle her up to be sitting second in that race. And then she eventually took over. And again, was never really asked for all of her effort there by Hernandez coming down the stretch. So, she earned a little bit of a lower buyer speed figure in terms of a 95. Here's the thing, though. This 3-year-old male crop, it's not as if they're turning out 110 and 115 buyers. The winning buyer of the Kentucky Derby was a 99 for Mystic Dan. We saw Fierceness run a 103 in the Jim Dandy. Sierra Leone has a 102 from that race. Dornick has run kind of consecutive, I think, 103s, if I'm not mistaken, in the Haskell and in the Belmont. So they're not that much of a gap between her best and their best. And again, a 3 or 4 point gap in a buyer speed figure easily can be overcome by the effectiveness of a trip, the pace scenario, etc. So I think that she is legitimately fast enough to run against the boys here. And one of the things you'll see in her running lines is you do see a lot of ones, right? She doesn't need the lead, though. She can rate. She showed that in the Coaching Club. She showed that in the Acorn. She can rate off the pace and still be effective. She famously in her debut kind of didn't get off to a very good start at all in that race and was able to come from well off the pace that day. So she can rate behind horses. I think that's the key dynamic in this race because there's going to be a lot of speed because you have to imagine, Dornick's going to go. That's his only way to win. You have to imagine Batten Down is going to go as well because that horse has only ever won going gate to wire. Now, you also have to imagine that Chad Brown is probably going to send Unmatched Wisdom. If for no other reason than his other runner, Sierra Leone, is going to be a deep closer and probably wants a little bit of pace to run into. I'm not suggesting Unmatched Wisdom is in this race simply to be a rabbit by any stretch because he's a legitimate horse that has got a shot in this race. But the more speed up front is better for Chad and Sierra Leone, no doubt about it. Then you have Fierceness, who's going to want to be very forward. Now, Fierceness can rate a little bit too, but he really likes to rate in that kind of second position, as we saw in the Jim Dandy, as we saw in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So he's not a horse that likes to get shuffled back to fourth or fifth or something like that. So there's a lot of speed. And I don't know if Thorpedo Anna wants to be a part of that speed. I think her best chance is to rate a little bit and sit behind that speed, going 1.25 miles and letting the boys maybe wear themselves out a little bit up front, really let that pace battle develop. And then she gets first crack at the leaders. And, I don't think they're going to stack 4 across the track in terms of Dornick, Batten Down, Unmatched Wisdom, and Fierceness, but they're going to press a pace. And so depending on, where she draws in terms of the post, I'm recording this on Saturday before the race. And, we'll see how that obviously plays in the dynamics of where Brian Hernandez Jr. places her early on in this race. But I think sitting off the pace is probably the better tactical move, just because it's going to be, I would imagine, at least a contested pace, even if it is not an explosive pace. I think it'll be a contested one. And I actually think it is going to be a pretty fast pace in this race. So, it's interesting because if she goes and really she tries to be a part of that early pace scenario, she could easily get burned up if they're going a little too fast, especially going that 1.25 mile distance of the Travers. But here's the thing. She absolutely belongs in this race. She does not have an equal in her 3-year-old female crop. And that is evident looking at the field in the Alabama, where really the horse Candied, who's your morning line favorite in that race, is really the only horse who has even come close to running the same numbers that Thorpedo Anna has run to this point. And so I don't blame Ken McPeak and the Connections for saying, listen, let's take a shot. Let's try to see how good this filly is, because as I mentioned, she has never really been asked. So the efforts that you have seen have been easy wins. And that's something else to keep in mind when you're handicapping this race and looking at the form and you're looking at buyer speed figures, things like that. Dornick is being asked for everything he's got. Fierceness is being asked for everything he's got. Sierra Leone is being asked for everything he's got. And they run 102s and 103s. She's not being asked for her best, and she's running 99s, 95s. Imagine if Brian asks her for her best. She might be able to kick up to another gear. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, especially when you're looking at things like buyer speed figures or any sort of speed figure, because you're looking at final time and things along those lines, but then just visually watching the race. Hernandez isn't going to the crop. He's not pumping down that hard. He's not asking her for everything. He's keeping her focused coming down the stretch. He's definitely asking her to keep up and to keep her pace going, but he's not sitting there really asking her for everything he's got. He's not using, to quote Tom Durkin, he's not imploring her. I always loved Durkin's call with Rachel's Woodward, Calvin Burrell, imploring his filly. Brian Hernandez Jr. has never had to implore Thorpedo Anna. So I think it's an interesting dynamic to see what's going to happen when that takes place on Saturday. Here's one thing I know for sure. Saratoga is going to go absolutely bonkers if she pulls this victory off and she wins. And I also know she's, in my opinion, she is good enough that I know at the top of the stretch, she's going to have a shot. Now, can she close the deal? Can she beat the boys? That's going to be a big question, obviously. And that is the defining question. I think she's got a shot, though. I really do. I don't think this is just some cosmetic. I don't think she's a takeout reducer. I don't think she's just an automatic toss. I think she's got a shot against the boys if Brian can carve out the right trip for her in this race. Now, the great part about her is the price, because if she's running against her fellow females, she's going to be 1-5, 1-9 in every single race. You're not going to get any value on her at all. Here's the beauty, though. You're going to get value on Thorpedo Anna. If you believe in her, and I know a couple people who do, if you believe in her, then you're going to get the most honest price that you could possibly get on her anymore. Really, after the Kentucky Oaks. After that race, you were never going to get an honest price on her. Well, now you're going to get an honest price on her again, because she's going to vie for favoritism with Dornick, Sierra Leone, and Fierceness. And those 3 horses are going to take a ton of money as well. So if you really believe in Thorpedo Anna, then she's going to give you an honest price to bet on. Now, on the flip side, if you are like my good friend Josh Rodriguez from On the Wrong Lead, if you think she's nothing more than a takeout reducer, then that's a great day for you as a bettor as well. If you think she's an automatic toss, then you know that here's a filly, here's an entry who's going to take a ton of money and who's going to allow for maybe the horse I like, whether it's one of those first three I mentioned or maybe a long shot like Batten Down or Unmatched Wisdom, to be an even better price as a result. So it's a win-win from a bettor standpoint. If you really like Thorpedo Anna, you're getting the best price you're ever going to get on her. If you like everybody else, Thorpedo Anna is going to help you get a more honest price on those horses than if she wasn't in the race. So listen, from a betting standpoint, a lot of dynamics here. It's going to be a lot of fun for sure. Well, listen, we got a lot of great Travers coverage all week. Make sure to check out the Travers Day Capping the Card that'll be dropping on the Friday before the Travers. I'll be joined by David Aragona. We're going to have a lot of race previews for that whole weekend. Acacia Clement's going to join me to talk about the Personal Ensign and the Sword Dancer. We're just going to have a slew of different content here on NYRA Bets YouTube, so make sure to subscribe and like this video. All right, friends, that'll do it for this spotlight on Thorpedo Anna. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.